Could Poland become the next Germany? Poland is a tiny country of just over 38 million people. It has not always been the biggest of nations, but in the past few decades, it has been experiencing a transformation that might turn it into the most powerful nation in Europe. How exactly has this rapid transformation been possible? What is Russia doing to stop this? Before we get into that, make sure you have liked this video and also that you are subscribed to this channel. Today, Poland's armed forces are in pretty good shape, even outperforming countries like Germany, Italy, and Spain. The Russian situation in Ukraine has thrown a curveball into the European military landscape, making military strength important again. Some European nations are considering building their own defense capabilities instead of relying solely on NATO. Poland is leading the charge, mainly because they see Moscow differently from Warsaw compared to Madrid, Rome, or Lisbon. The Poles are already spending over 2% of their GDP on defense, but in 2022, they're boosting that to 5%. It seems like by the end of the decade, no one in Europe will match Poland's defense spending. Poland is well on its way to becoming the new Central European superpower. Surprising as it may be to many, there's a palpable sense that Poland is on the brink of emerging as a significant player in Europe. This shift could also spell the end for the 1945 Yalta Conference and Putin's aspirations to expand Russian influence throughout Eastern Europe, reaching all the way to the German border. The rise of Poland isn't a matter of prophecy. Rather, it's an inevitable consequence of the substantial global geopolitical shifts that have been quietly unfolding since 1990. While this transformation went largely unnoticed until recently, back in 2009, Professor George Friedman offered a comprehensive geopolitical analysis of Europe and Asia in his bestseller, The Next 100 Years. In his work, he asserted that Poland could follow in the footsteps of Israel, becoming a major player in Europe. Israel's ascent to prominence was largely attributed to unwavering support from the USA in terms of military, political, and economic backing. The idea now is that the United States could aim for a similar partnership with Poland, setting the stage for the creation of a Polish bloc. This bloc would encompass Poland, the Baltic states, Ukraine, and other Eastern European nations, potentially diminishing Russia's dominant position. This development could harken back to the 17th century, where the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth extended from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The key to all of this is the U.S. commitment to the region and its necessity to handle Berlin, Paris, and Moscow. They don't have much of a choice, even if they haven't quite grasped it yet. For the USA, the Ukraine-Russian conflict is like a stand-in for their rivalry with China, maybe even a practice run for what's coming up. The U.S. can't rely on France and Germany anymore. They seem eager to cozy up to Russia and get back to business as usual, like the days before February 24th this year. All three of them aren't big fans of U.S. dominance in Europe and are determined to make Ukraine give in, despite France and Germany's pretense. At the moment, there are only two NATO countries in Europe ready to stand up to Russian power: Britain and Poland. Once Sweden and Finland join NATO, which looks likely, we could probably add them to the list. The rest of the European countries are too entangled with Russia economically, too into pacifism, or simply ignoring the tough spot they'll be in if Russia comes out on top. Back on February 17th, 2022, a security deal got inked in Kiev involving Britain, Poland, and Ukraine. Does that make Boris Johnson some kind of fortune teller? No, but it does show that the powers in Western Europe have a clearer sense of the seriousness of the situation. This historic deal, just a taste of what's to come in the coming decades, got a big boost at last year's NATO conference in Madrid. During the conference, leaders agreed to ramp up Western defenses significantly, increasing the number of troops ready to roll at a moment's notice sevenfold to 300,000. They also decided to set up the U.S. Fifth Army headquarters in Poland on a permanent basis. What's even more significant is that Poland is all in on growing its army to 300,000. Within 5 years, they'll have the biggest and most powerful armed forces in Europe. But the most impactful statement came from the new British Chief of the General Staff, Sir Patrick Saunders. He said, "Britain is facing a situation like it did in 1937, which means it finally realized the threat posed by Hitler, but only this time it is being posed by Putin." History and geopolitics teach us that things tend to repeat themselves over time. This means that we can't escape the regular return of some major global issues. It's like the four horsemen of the apocalypse making a comeback every few decades: disease, war, famine, and destruction. Right now, we're in the middle of this cycle. We've had disease with the whole COVID pandemic, and now we're dealing with the war in Ukraine. Famine seems to be creeping up on us with rising inflation, food, and energy shortages. The aftermath of all this is starting to show as social connections break down both within societies and between countries. We're seeing less global interaction, and it seems like this trend will continue, slow but steady. Most Western governments haven't fully acknowledged this yet, but some are more aware than others. Maybe it's a good thing that they're taking it slow, because we don't want to freak out the voters or the Russians. Panic might lead to some regrettable actions. Sometimes, though, shaking things up is the only way to find a new balance. If experts like George Friedman and other analysts are on the money, we might see a new powerful player like Poland emerge and work with the US and the UK to challenge Russian imperialism in Europe. Poland's economy seems pretty strong when you compare it to other EU countries, but it's even more impressive when you check out its former Soviet neighbors, including Russia. Despite Russia having a much bigger workforce, tons of natural resources, and loads of international influence, Poland managed to make the transition to a market-based, globally cooperative economy. If Poland's current industrial growth keeps up, it could become one of the biggest economies in Europe. That would be a big help for the EU, which is dealing with economic issues in some of its member states. Besides being a feel-good success story, Poland's economic journey is like a textbook example that other countries around the world can learn from, especially those around Ukraine. But no country is without its problems. While Poland's economic growth has been super impressive, it's still not as well off as a bunch of other European countries. It's just starting to break into the upper middle class club worldwide. During this stage, countries can be kind of vulnerable, and even minor economic hiccups can mess up years of progress. Poland will probably run into challenges like changing demographics, the pressure of keeping the growth going, and competition from other countries that offer similar goods at lower prices. Poland's also got some unique challenges because of its spot on the map. While the chances of an invasion are really slim, it does pose some big challenges for the growing economy. But if Poland can deal with these issues, it might actually have a shot at becoming one of the world's richest and most influential economies, maybe even giving Germany a run for its money on a per capita basis. Poland's economy today pretty much kicked off in 1990. Before that, it was in a sort of a tight spot because it had a communist government, not exactly part of the Soviet Union, but heavily influenced by them. Then in 1989, with the Soviet Union losing its grip, Poland decided to shake things up. They elected a new party for the first time in a long while, ever since the old government got the boot back in World War II. The new government went to work turning those state-owned industries into private companies. It was a bit of a puzzle for a bunch of countries in the region, including Russia. You see, in the past, almost everything was owned by the government in these ex-Soviet states, Poland included. As these countries switched over to free market systems, they had to figure out who got what. State-owned stuff was up for grabs in a real free market. Just look up government privatization, and you'll find a bunch of stories about things like power grids, highways, and even state-owned banks being sold to private investors. It's sometimes a bit controversial, but the idea is that private businesses, driven by profit and competition, often do a better job and cost consumers less than public-run organizations with no competition and no real reason to be efficient. Of course, there's always a debate about what should stay government owned and what should go private. It's not about everything being privatized or everything being owned by the people. So Poland realized it needed to loosen its grip on all industries. This quick move towards privatization and free markets got the nickname shock therapy because in the end, it was a necessary and much needed step. Poland has now become a powerful nation capable of influencing European politics in a very major way. Would you say their transformation has been worth it? With that, we have come to the end of this video. If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe for more. Where money matters, we'll see you on the next one.